Welcome to The Crucible, Conversations for the Curious. I am Hamish, your host. This podcast is for anyone going through awakenings, trying to make sense of life, whether dark nights of the soul, needing to make life-changing decisions, struggling with addiction or critical illness, or simply realizing that their life as they know it is not aligned to values and purpose. You are not alone. You can get through this, I promise you. Life is far more beautiful on the other side.
And so I had this really great gift of being able to tap into creativity and this powerful energy of self-discovery and sharing yourself and flow and all these words. And then I just decided I wasn't going to trust it. And I cut it off for probably about 15 years.
Ryan and I met on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and we've had some really good conversations. And so I've asked him to this podcast today because he's got a great story to tell. Ryan, thanks so much for being here. Can you tell me a little bit about your story, please?
Yeah, Hamish, I want to tell you, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's great to be with you again. And just before we started recording, we were talking about how it's funny how, people on a similar journey, similar minds, similar spirits end up finding each other, even though we're continents away. I don't know. It occurred to me that there's a little bit of magic in that. And we were just experiencing that right now. But yeah, my story, I guess it's hard to know where to begin, but I guess any place is as good as another. I kind of think back to this early access to creative pursuits, which is like music, right? And I really felt at an early age that this using creative energy, I could plug into things and it wasn't like it was coming from me. It was like I was some kind of vessel that was able to, I, not to use words that are like woo woo, but using words like woo woo, I was able to plug in some divine thing. It was just some instrument of something that was coming through me. And I think that made me self-aware to a degree that early on might have been unusual. And I think that throughout my life, I really see that there has been this kind of questioning of that, of the value of that, and I think really it's been about self-trust and self-discovery simultaneously, and then just allowing life to kind of come through you. And I think I started talking about music, and I think music early on was my first access to this. And I think I've discovered that really you can access this kind of divine thing anywhere. And I've done that in a bunch of different ways. So I started with this music um, business, and I spent a lot of time writing songs. And what do you need to write songs? Well, you need pain. And so, I got very good at kind of, noticing pain, noticing, what was there, what was coming up. And I was able to, at least early on, turn that into a redemptive thing. It was very spiritual, and that the process of writing music became something negative comes in, something, uh, victorious kind of comes from that. And I think as I got older, I started questioning that. And I was like, yeah, there's no utility in this. There isn't, I need to go get a job and just I remember my dad always used to say this term, you need to join the working schlubs like the rest of us, and he still says stuff like that. But I took it real seriously. I was like, I guess that's what you're supposed to do. And so I had this really great gift of being able to tap into creativity and this powerful energy of self-discovery and sharing yourself and flow and all these words. And then I just decided I wasn't going to trust it. And I cut it off for probably about 15 years until COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I really, I was in a new town by myself here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I just moved here. I had a relationship that had ended, and I just was kind of quarantined alone in a new city by myself. And I kind of just went down this. I was like, okay, I need to kind of get back to where we were, the first journey, right? We were headed towards this spiritual journey, and we went to this very, worldly, let's make money, let's do all these things. And I had recently got divorced from that, and I just ended up here in Cincinnati, and really just on this journey of self-discovery that really was just a magical kind of awakening, right? So I would say that's kind of the overview of my story there.
Thank you for that. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? When you, as a child, as a young person, you've got the whole world in front of you. You can see everything. You can play. You can dance. You can be creative, and we get it beaten out of ourselves for best intentions, maybe parents, school teachers, whatever. Um,
Yeah,
and that's tragic. But I mean, there's such a theme of the people I've spoken to where they've had this intuition, this sense, this passion, creativity is such a theme. And
yeah,
yet, no, get a proper job, get a proper job, earn money, work hard to earn money, work hard to work money, and that scarcity, and round it goes, and we disconnect from creativity. And I think it's tragic. Um,
yeah.
what made you realize you wanted to get back into it? What was that disconnect?
I think there is always this belief that, I started this habit of, okay, I just need to do this for another year and then I'll get back to kind of what I was doing before, right? But you don't realize that all these things that you're building up uh, are structures in your life, right? So, kind of everything you're doing now is building on something, right? So I'd be, okay, so if you work a lot, you're setting yourself up to work a lot. And it's like if you play a lot, you're setting yourself up to play a lot. And like I was just setting myself up just to work more and more. And um, I just found myself buried in it. And what I was able to do is just be like, I remained connected to the possibility of connecting with this creative energy again. And so it was kind of hope. It was kind of, a memory of it. It was kind of I don't know, like I understood that it was possible. It was something I believed, even though I didn't have that belief reflected back to me from the world.
So you managed to make sense of it before you burnt out, before you hit a rock bottom or anything like that.
Yeah, I think I hit bottoms, and I always say that it wasn't like a rock bottom, but there were certainly bottoms,
Mhm.
and I think that just one of those things. I think I remember the time. So I was married for a short time, and humor is really big with me. I like to laugh about things, and I realize now that I used humor to kind of, and I think this is true with comedians. Not that I'm a comedian, but I think you use it to hide pain. I used to tell people because they're like, "Wow, you're getting divorced," and I was like, "Yeah, it was a very successful marriage for 2.5 years." And they'd kind of laugh and they wouldn't ask any more questions. But I think to honor both her and I in that, we didn't. There was no vision for us. It was just caught up in the moment of excitement, and I think a relationship is deeper than that. There needs a deeper connection on purpose and what you're creating in the world. And I remember it's almost embarrassing for me to admit now, but this was 7 or 8 years ago. I remember thinking, well, when I was getting divorced and that was all happening, I was like, well, I guess the whole world is screwed up, and here I am doing everything right, and man, I was put in a shitty situation. And that's so silly because the exact opposite was true, right? I was just so disconnected from who I who I really am and who I really wanted to create that uh, the world was responding as such. And that's really become clear to me now.
I think that's remarkable. I mean, I actually want to acknowledge you first for appreciating your ex, and
Yeah,
there is a connection there. Still, you respect her. So many people, it falls apart. I hate you. Take the children. Take the money. Fight, fight, fight. So, that awareness is remarkable, and I wish more people would have that compassion. So I think that is super. I really take my hat off to you for that, and also that you had that wisdom to see how important it was to stay authentic, and that must have been quite hard because, as you said, that mask of I'm fine,
yeah,
is I did it. I'm fine. Everything is all right as I was falling apart and crying inside.
yeah,
But particularly that's what men do, isn't it? We have to put that face on because we're expected to, which I think is sad, very, very sad. But what has happened now then, now that you've made sense of who you were, what you were doing, and what you are doing now? How has your life changed in that respect?
It's kind of funny because the way, well, first of all, I want to say that yeah, I acknowledge the compliment you said about, not being angry with my ex-wife, but I think really what was happening was that was my way of doing it, was being like, well, you can't help it, you're just screwed up like the rest of the world. That was the way, and some people, the way they do that is they get real angry and they say, I'm taking the kids, I'm taking everything from you, and that awareness wasn't there. And
Yeah.
so that was kind of my way of doing that. I just, instead of just blaming her, I just blamed her as a default for being in the world. And it's just, to me, that sounds funny now, but your question was what has happened now, and I think just really an increased, just such a huge growing in self awareness. So there was no, I could not see my fault the in the marriage, for example. I could not see. I had kind of a checklist in my mind. I was like, we'll get a nice place to live. We'll make it so she doesn't really have to work if she doesn't want to. These are not things that she wanted. She wanted to be in the trenches with me, and I just, at the end of the day, I think really what happened was is that I wasn't ready for that. I didn't, I wasn't self assured enough. I wanted to go and in my own trench and do my own thing and do my own work, and it just, that's easy. So no, I don't. You stay over there. That's not a relationship. It just isn't. And so I think what's happened is just growing awareness of that, of the story that I was telling myself about my life, and then realizing that even now, I work with a coach and I have a therapist just because I believe in this idea of self-discovery. And I don't know that you ever get to a place where you're like, okay, I'm discovered, but I just had, I coach people, I work with people on things. And I had this great conversation with my coach the other day. And he literally said, it's funny where you can end up in these things. And he said, so I can't remember the context exactly of our conversation. He goes, so you measure life in time. Life is measured in time. And I just was thinking, I just immediately like welled up. I was like, yeah, I'm like, everything's based on time. Like, I'm just saying, I've got to do this for so long instead of just, acknowledging what I have and being present. And that experience of gaining that self-awareness of, man, I'm just sitting here being like, okay, Tuesday's done, Wednesday's done, check. And it's just, you're not in life then. You're just, it's life to you is checking things off your checklist instead of actually being there. And I found that, over and over and over again, just be there, just show up there. You remember the past, but the only thing that's really there is now. Even in the future, when you're there, when you get there, it's going to be now.
I
So
love
that's
that.
that self-awareness,
Mm.
to just answer your question. I think just this increasing self-awareness and realizing that there isn't a place you get to. It's a continuous growing in self-awareness. There's magic in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's so important. And yeah, it is awareness for me, awareness of who I am, what I'm doing. And that is important. And it
Mhm.
takes slowing down, doesn't it? It takes slowing down and taking a bit more effort and being retrospective, looking at the past, but not like, oh God, I did that. But I did that. And what can I learn from it? So yeah, you have to look back at the past, but not lean on it as the only crutch you've got. You can make new decisions. I
Yeah.
think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think what you said, being still, like being, I can't remember the exact term, being, slowing down is what you said. And I think just one of the things I realized is that, you know, we live in a very Western culture. It's like hustle and grind and all this stuff. And that's kind of silly, especially if you're trying to decide what your life is about. And one of the things during this kind of uh, awakening that I had is I discovered yoga, which it's kind of funny because I always felt called to do yoga, but I was like, it's a woman's thing. As a matter of fact, my father asked me, he goes, "Are you being a yoga teacher to pick up women?" Which, I'm like, no, it's because, I never, as a man, like you said, I never thought about my body. It was just a tool to get work done. Right. But just, it's like, oh, wow. Now, like just before this call, it's early in the morning here. I did a 45-minute yoga practice that I'm just not going to be right that day if I don't do it. But the one thing that you really learn in doing that is that there's one method, which we have the hustle and grind, is go out there and get the life you want, get the things, get lots of money, buy all this stuff. And that's, a lot of our world is set up around that. But there's also something else too, where, in yoga and meditation, what you're doing is you're actually creating space. You're creating a bubble around you. And then you're just kind of, okay, what's calling me? Where am I feeling pulled to? And it takes a while to be able to, because then you're like, oh, you know what, I have to go text this person, or I have to go do this and do, and you just, no, I'm creating this space here. And then when you, there is a skill there, I guess, you can feel where you're being pulled. And a lot of times this is where you discover your kind of purpose, if you will, where, and it always, well, I don't want to say always because nothing's always, but it usually has to do with connecting with somebody or impacting somebody else in a way. It has to be in relationship. And I think that if we all could quiet our minds, we'll find that our nature is to actually want to help other people. And that's transformed, because I think that's transformed the way I thought about the world. Because I'd always be like, okay, there's, when I'm looking at the world, the person who just cut me off or whatever, I would think that guy is just trying to take something, he's trying to win, and now I look at it like, what is happening to where he or she can't get to the point where they're able to help somebody, they're able to connect, because that's really what people want. That's what we want as a species, as humanity. And even the most heinous acts of, ignorance or violence, they're all rooted in something that is removing something out of the way to be able to impact somebody, to be able to share kind of love. And I think, to me, that's my way I explain to myself, is like, oh, all you need is love. It sounds like a flowery thing, but I think that's what that's saying, is that when it comes down to it, we want to help each other.
Yep.
And this kind of hustle and grind kind of culture and go get what you want, it gets in the way of that. So being calm, being still, and trying to just figure out where you're being pulled. You have to really, really be still to understand that. And that's just another kind of branch of self-awareness that has really impacted the journey.
Yeah, I think that is fab. And so that's the morning practice of you. You always sit down and do something in the mornings, or do something in the mornings.
Yeah, no, I do a meditation and a yoga practice. And really, that's one of the other things that in this period of kind of transformation is, I was having a lot of trouble just at work. Even I would write a to-do list, and I'd get to work and work really hard, and then never get to the to-do list. And I'm like, okay, I got a focus problem. And I read somewhere that, people who are approaching 40 start having testosterone issues. So I go to the doctor. I'm like, listen, I got low testosterone. You got to check me. She's like, why do you think that? Anyway, she's like, you don't have low testosterone, So she's like, go talk to a psychiatrist. And they're like, well, you have, the psychiatrist is like, yeah, let's take these tests. Let's talk a little bit. Well, you clearly have ADHD. And I'm like, what? I don't know if this is just something that people have suggested to me throughout my whole life. I began telling people in my life, I was just diagnosed with ADHD. And they're like, what, you didn't know? And I just, as whatever you might think about that, it was something that I was shocked by. And so I realized that there's certain things I have to do. I also run, and I was doing all these things to really just organize and calm up the intense energy in my mind. And I think that is, you can call it a diagnosis, but basically what he was saying was that there's just, that's a the go 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 mentality of our culture was just so implanted in there that my brain started running like that. And at that time, I had to make a choice. I had to be like, am I going to continue to run like this, or am I going to invest some time every day so that way I can really experience and be in my life? And most days I choose that. So I think practices like that, and it doesn't have to be yoga, it doesn't have to be, um, you know, uh, anything. It has to be some kind of being in touch with your life, being here now, where you're not concerned about the past or present. It's funny how I think of like some of the best memories that I have are actually just, there's not much happening in the visual part of the memory, right? It's just this, it's like the way the light comes in a window or something. But what's actually attached to that is this feeling of peace, of being in the moment and kind of seeing like, the dust dance around the light, but you were there for that moment. And it just occurred to me, the reason why that's such a powerful moment is because my life up until a certain point was filled with just such a lack of presence, that those were the moments of presence in a bedroom, laying there, just waking up in the morning and seeing the sun come in. And I'll think about that all the time. And I was relying on those things just naturally happening, because we all have natural moments of presence, but just like working out or something, you can train yourself to be more present. And I think there's always more to gain there.
I love that. I can see that as well. I can just see rolling over and just seeing the dust. I often go for a walk around sunset, especially in autumn and winter. And the other
Yeah.
day I was just doing that, just striding along, storming away in my own head. And suddenly there was the sun coming from in front of me to one side and a whole lot of bugs. And
Yeah.
my whole body went jump, jump, jump into slow motion, just watching them, just fluttering around, the light catching them. Took a few
Yeah.
photographs and just watched these little things. They weren't fireflies, they were just translucent, so glowing. But my whole system went, thank you, slow down and listen and
Yeah.
watch. And that delight of being present, it's, yeah, you remember it. I remember that. I'm always going to remember that. And I think it's, yeah, it's really precious, isn't it?
Yeah. And I can tell by the way you tell that story,
Mm.
it's profound. It was an
Mm.
experience. But if you go to the office and you're talking to the guys or girls at the office and you're like, oh, I was walking today and I saw the light coming up over the horizon, and they're like, well, that's great, Hamish. Like, we got work to do. It doesn't
Mm.
fit in that context. But
Yeah.
I think there's a general truth to that. But I think that again, the meaningfulness in that was,
Mm.
it ran deep.
I want to go back a little bit to your diagnosis of ADHD. Um,
Hmm.
I was listening to some stuff on TikTok the other day, and for some reason, I following this bloke, and he was saying that it's just a hyper creativity. Your brain is always creating, wanting to create. I mean, he says that, someone else says that, someone else says we're all hunter gatherers and we're the hunterers.
Hmm.
People who haven't got ADHD are the gatherers. I mean, there's all sorts of theories, but I really like that fact that the child is curious and wants to create and wants to do and wants to be. I mean, you summed that up at the beginning. You were creative, doing the music, in tune, tapping in, and had
Hmm.
it removed from your life. Um, I just wonder whether that what you think about your experience from that, because it's quite interesting. So many people I've spoken to, particularly people coming off addiction, found
Yeah.
out they were using their drug, drink, eating as a coping strategy, as a self-medicating. I certainly was, because
Yeah.
this thing was doing
Sure.
it at the moment. And I'm finding the meditating and a slow walk help exactly what you said. So everything you've said, I'm a few days behind your awareness there. So I'd love to hear a little bit of what. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts around ADHD, whether you've been diagnosed or not, isn't really important, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it is either. And that's so a couple of things. I had a big background in psychology, but I think when I got diagnosed, it's like, okay, well, now what? What do I do? So I think that's where I kind of got into coaching, was a little bit more future focused, and it really helped with that. So that's kind of one distinction there. I love what you said there about ADHD being like, your brain creatively going into overload, and I think I've never looked at it that way. And I love the way that is, because one of the things I realized is that that's my that's what I love, is creation. I mean, that what we're doing right now is we're creating, and that's even where there isn't anything to create, I'm looking for a way to create it. So I think there's a lot to that. And I think that, these practices of meditation, just like any kind of energy, right? If you've got, I think of like a hose, if you've got a hose that just has an open round, if you put your thumb over half of it, you focus the energy of it. So I think that's why, I feel called to meditation and yoga, because I find if I calm that stuff down, it focuses the energy into something that could be more meaningful. And when I say meaningful, I guess I mean impactful, because if I'm just shooting energy everywhere, it doesn't have an intent, right? So you're putting intent behind it, just kind of focusing into something. And I think, so I really like what you said about the creative energy there. I think that is probably true. I think, and I think it does tie into, I kind of came across this because, you and I have talked about, alcoholism and addiction. And really what we know now about that is that people need to do things to regulate their emotions, right? So some of us are naturally, we can just, think ourselves into being calm. And some of us, we need to do something drastic to calm ourselves down. And it's not good or bad. Some of us are just really high highs, really low lows, and we're trying to mitigate that journey between the two gaps. And I think I see people, I used to think of people, because alcoholism runs in my family, and I never was really subject to that, but I had a lot of harsh judgments. And I started realizing as I got older and I understood what was actually happening with them, is that they were really desperately trying to, like you said, regulate, like turn down the thoughts, turn down the feelings. And that's just the same as what I was trying to do with music or art or whatever. And there are probably times in there where I used alcohol in the same way. I really just think that as much as I loved beer, I think I was a little bit allergic to it. But anyway, that's another story. But I really realize now that we're all trying to do that to some degree. We have to regulate ourselves. We just don't want to be subject to. We need to have some control. And I think also too, there's something to be said about, I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but we said there's 3 primal drives, right? The drive to be safe, the drive to eat, the drive to procreate. Well, this certain scientist, which I can't remember who it was, he said there's actually a 4th drive too. He believes is equal, and that is the drive to alter your consciousness. And so we do that through, really what we're able to project our consciousness forward and be like, I want to do this. I want to go on this journey here. Dogs don't do that. They're like, oh, I'm hungry. My food's over here, So we are able to kind of imagine the future. That is consciousness being, kind of adjusted, modified. And so some of us really get a lot of value from that. So the whole process of, drinking alcohol or even smoking cigarettes or smoking marijuana, that alters your consciousness. And so this person is saying, listen, that's a primal drive. So some people eat food that alters your consciousness. Some people exercise, it alters your consciousness. But what we're able to do with that altering of consciousness is better understand ourselves, is better strategize survival and fulfillment. Yeah, so there's a lot there. There's a lot there with that, and I think it totally changed the way I think about addiction. It totally changed the way I think about just the way that we regulate. Because I'd see people. I smoked for years. I started smoking when I was like 12, and looking back now, even when I was younger, I had anxieties, so I would hide behind the school and be smoking a cigarette, but it would kind of calm me down. And I'll see people smoking now, and my first thought is, oh, that person should quit. But I realize they're that is their choice to kind of regulate themselves. So the judgment's kind of gone away there, if you will.
We're just trying to keep ourselves safe, aren't we?
Yeah,
Exactly, you said one of those three plus one of those four things. Just trying to keep
yeah,
ourselves safe, and that's everything from lashing out, from being reactive, from being passive, from being the victim, from isolating, from eating to hide in full sight, from drinking. Um, I sometimes wonder how humanity keeps on going because we're so self-destructive. But obviously, the third one, procreating, is very strong. Yeah.
yeah. It is too. And here's something else that I learned because I just had, 15 months ago, I had twin boys. And so I was, talk about another journey. I was the oldest of six, and we were very close in age. And I was just, take your brothers here. You have to do this. So I walked around for 20 years being like, I'm not having children. That's another story. But I had these two children who they cannot fend for themselves, right? When they're born, and they still can't. And I realized it really changed. This changed the way I thought about humanity because the drive to procreate is enormous, right? And that at least starts the process, right, of keeping humanity going. But it takes such care and patience and love to keep children safe and fed and alive that it just changed the way I felt about humanity. It's got to be, of course, we have people on the edges who don't personify those things, and and there's problems, there's unheard of things we could talk about there, but it for the most part, look, humanity, there's going to be 9 billion of us pretty soon on the earth, right? And this is because of such a natural predilection to want to take care of each other. So that's what I hear when you say that, hey, how does humanity survive? It's because that's our natural instinct, is to take care of each other.
I love that. The energy of this conversation is going round and round, and that, you know, the fact that we are, and I agree with you. And a lot of people think, humanity is awful and la la la, but
Mm-hmm.
there is, love is overpoweringly wonderful, and yes, it's scary, but I haven't had kids, so congratulations and good luck in equal measure. But yeah, I mean, you've explained that to me, and obviously my brother and sister have. They've chosen to have children, and that sense of self and I've got to do this. Suddenly, you have to bring this little life alive and look after it
Yeah,
every waking and sleeping moment, and that's hard. But also, you said it's changed your perspective completely, and I just think that's something I will never experience. And
never say never.
trust me, it'll be a miracle.
Yeah,
It will be a miracle, or a word
I
with a surgeon. But yeah,
yeah, I think that I agree with everything you said there, except there's one piece, and they're like, and I don't want to speak for all parents, but the thing that I found was it's not. This is the thing that really moved. It's not as hard as I thought. I thought it would be very difficult to have the children, but they test your patience, and but that's okay. It's like you kind of work your way through it. But it's so funny because I remember looking in the mirror right before we were going. They were twins, so we had them naturally in the operating room, but just in case there was problems, we go to the operating room. So they're like, "All right, Dad, get ready." And I remember I was like so nervous. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And it's the most natural thing in the world. It's just like, oh, yeah, we've been doing this for literally thousands of years, and just what happens to you, like just I slept in the most uncomfortable chair for the first night and got up every 20 minutes just to kind of like make sure they're okay. And it's it's just natural. It's just like, when you learn how to walk, it's difficult at first, right? Or whatever, but you enjoy the progress. You enjoy walking then, and it's just another very fascinating, facet of life. That's just, it's interesting. I would be like, yeah, I haven't slept in 3 days or whatever, but it wasn't as difficult as if I was, studying for 3 days or whatever, like I might have been in school or what have you. So, yeah, just such an interesting experience. But it really has, I think that we kind of have this nervous system that's set up, and we've got fight or flight, and we've got, this kind of rest and digest and, care and relaxation. And I think if you look at those as two separate lenses, you can see what they project into the world, right? So you've got violence comes from this, this fight or flight. It's part of all of us, right? But I think when you see violence in the world, it's because it's based in fear, right? And then you've also got this other lens, which is like rest and digest, and care for your young ones and all that. And that comes from a place of peace. So it's like which lens are you feeding, right? So if you're just going to hustle and grind, that's going to project a lot of violence out into the world, right? Whereas if you're going to create space and growth and nurture things, you're going to have a different perspective of the world. So I don't know how I got there, Hamish, but yeah.
That's actually really interesting, because you've opened up another question there. Because how do we, when we find ourselves in that negative, the angry, it's also protective. It's also it's a masculine energy. It's not all negative, but
Yeah.
how do you step back into the other side where your sympathetic system is not fight or flight? You're able to calm down. How would I move across to that when I become aware of it?
Yeah, I think the key part of your question there is when you become aware of it,
Yeah.
because we know now, because the brain is, actually your amygdala, which controls those responses initially, is reacting before you're conscious of anything. Okay, I think we know that now. So a lot of times when you're in that fight or flight mode, you're not aware of it when you enter it. So I think that's kind of the survival brain kind of taking over, right? It's where anxiety comes from, because we evolved, if you will, into a world where we're always worried about the tiger that's over the hill. So we're kind of like a little bit like nervous, right? And so you can train your brain to completely bypass that. You don't want to, that's too far. That's a bridge too far, if you will. You can think of, there's the famous picture of on the extreme side of things, of that monk who, in protest of the Vietnam War, covered themselves in gas and there was no sound, no movement, no nothing. And so we can assume, we'll never know for sure, that he was so far to this, being disconnected from, or just, being able to separate himself from his body, his bodily sensations, that, he wasn't able to react, or there was no reaction to this terrible pain that he was going through, right? That's again, that's an extreme example. On the other side, you've got people who just are, they're fearful of other people. They're kind of, everybody's kind of out to get you type thing. And if our brain is also, if we're looking for what we're wanting to find, so we can literally find evidence for whatever it is. So again, that goes for what I'm saying here too. So, that's why there's no, hey, this is the way it is, because we're all dealing with kind of our perception and these things are in there. So the number one thing, once you realize you're in there, Andrew Huberman, which is he's a neurologist at Stanford, has a great podcast, and I've learned a lot from him. But he has there's one breathing technique that is shown to move you from your fight or flight to your rest and digest very quickly. And that's called the physiological sigh. And I'll demonstrate it here, but if you think about it, this looks like children when they're really upset and they start calming themselves down, they start doing this. It's like, so you'll see children going like that. And what they're actually doing is that's their body's natural response to move from fight or flight to rest and digest, right? So if I catch myself moving in that, like it could be just, sometimes it's for no reason at all. You see somebody who, you're walking in the grocery store or the market and you see somebody that is threatening to you, and all of a sudden you're like thinking, it's like, oh, well, I'll inhale about 95% and you do that 5 times and it starts switching over. And I think that's one way to really access it right away in the moment. And I think things like meditation and yoga and martial arts and mindfulness activities, what you're training to do is you're training to a simplified way to say it is really kind of switch tracks, right? You're saying, hey, it's okay. We're okay. We're going to move over to this rest and digest part of our nervous system. And it takes time. It takes practice.
I love that about the children, because I can just see kids doing that. They're crying, they're screaming, and they're calming down. It's that, and you probably see that with your two quite often. Just that,
Yeah.
just settling. I can watch it, and I can feel my whole body as they're doing it. A parent, like, thank God they're finally calming down, so it calms the parent down as well. But really, really interesting. It is, isn't it? It's slowing down, becoming aware, and being intentional, realizing that something's not happening. So you're learning to feel your body as well, aren't you? Feel that tightness in your chest when the anxiety comes. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you just you start kind of making a list, if you will, or what are things that happen. Like tightening of the chest is a good one. Or one of the things I realized is when I was starting to get stressed out, I would breathe really shallow. I'd be like, you know what I mean? And maybe a little quicker. But I notice that all the time now. And it's like, okay, let's deepen our breath. And then, that can be just such a powerful signal. And it's different for all of us. Sometimes it's like tightening in my shoulders, or sometimes it's just like making fists. I'll realize that I'm doing. And I'm like, what's going on here? And just learning how to notice those things. And it's not, again, it's a practice. It's not something that you're like, hey, I get there. I can hit the switch whenever I want to, because what happens in this practice is you keep getting, this is kind of your brain's job. You keep getting tricked. You're like, oh wait, that's not scary. I can't believe they got me. I can't believe I got upset over that. And so it's interesting, but that's, kind of back to our topic of like self-regulation. A lot of that is, when you talk about addiction and things like that, that's what's happening to us, is that's the easiest thing to do, is to have the drink or whatever it is, or to whatever, take the drug. And that is, as a matter of fact, there's some genius to that because it's so efficient, right? So you can't be, you can't say that anybody who's an addict is not intelligent. That's not the truth. It's just, wow, I'm having this experience. And that's what your brain does. It puts you in fight or flight, which is like really anxious, really, it doesn't feel good to be there. And the easiest thing to do is to go back and is to say, okay, I'm going to have that drink or whatever it is. And that's going to immediately switch you back over. It's just the cost of that over time is a great cost to pay.
You've nailed it on the head when it comes to my understanding of addiction. Because I found a way to make sense of what I didn't understand. I couldn't have conversations. I had certain beliefs that were incongruent to who I was. Flipping brilliant. It works. This works. Eating works. It all works. But as you said, it's that crutch. It gets old and it breaks. I told my doctor recently, I had a checkup for something, and I said I used to drink, and he said, that's not very healthy. I said, it kept me alive. I said, that was the tool that stopped me killing myself or going mad or whatever. He said he just did not understand that at all. So he'd obviously never had that addiction experience, which I'm grateful for. But that realization, when I had it, that kept me alive. That's taken all the guilt out. I don't feel guilty for being an alcoholic, or for when I was, because it kept me alive. Going right back to what we said earlier, it kept me alive. It kept me feel safe. So that realization that you've just told me is
Yeah.
so important in anything. You realize that, well, I was keeping myself safe and that's good enough. Now I know a bit better. I don't need to do that, or I can look to change. I can go that
Mhm.
breathing or whatever. Yeah. I think that is spectacular, important belief to spot and embrace.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate acknowledging your experience with that. And I think that's the thing that is probably, if there was something I think for myself to worry about kind of humanity moving forward, is that we have um, kind of an allegory for what we just talked about. We have all these quick fixes now, which we talked about the cell phone, and we talked about, I think one of the growing epidemics out there is like porn, because it does that same thing to the way the male brain is kind of accessed, right? Is it hits all those addictive things, and it's a way that people are regulating themselves, right? So, and not just porn, like we're talking about, we could talk about just social media in general, because if you think about it, what the phone is doing is it's accessing your kind of your dopamine networks, right? So you're activated, and it helps you kind of, we feel like not necessarily energized, but we're on a quest when we've got dopamine happening, right? Which is like a lot of what happens with addiction, is that you're driven. Some addictions, it all has to do with dopamine or driving us in a certain area or towards a certain behavior, but our phones do that too. So what happens when, we're all hacked into our computer, and we're going to be like, you know what, I want to, it's all about kind of pleasure, right? So how do I immediately access this? So you'll probably be able to, at some point in time, hit a button on your computer, run a program, and be like, okay, now I'm intoxicated. Like it'll just cause your brain to release what happens when you're intoxicated, um, or what have you. And there's some promise in that, and I'm sure it'll be announced, be like, hey, if you're feeling depressed, you know, download this app, and there'll be like some kind of thing that's plugged into you, and you're like, oh, I feel better. But you know, how good is that? What do we have to change, um, in order to, because there's something to be said about agency, right? I mean, what about the investment that goes in the front end of that? I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but one of the things that makes your recovery so valuable was the journey of doing it, right? Whereas if you were just like, okay, I'm suffering from addiction, I downloaded this app, okay, it's gone. It changes the meaning of things for us. And if we think about it, we're there in a lot of ways. Whereas before, if you wanted to pay a bill, you had to sit down and write a check, and then, address the envelope, put a stamp on it, put it in the mailbox. And now you do it while you're driving, and, and we call that convenience too. But, there is kind of when we start getting into the real fundamental things, like there's a lot of power there. And so what is the right balance of agency and convenience, and self-determination, and what should determine that? So, those are things that kind of concern me. But I think that there is definitely right now, I get caught by it all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, I talk to people about not doing this, and here I am on Instagram mindlessly scrolling. But it's that same thing. It's designed to be this kind of activator that activates us, just like an addiction is, and it regulates us too, because all of those things kind of work together. So it's interesting to see how this kind of things will progress on this path.
I think that's a really scary thought, but I completely agree. Um, it is, isn't it? You're giving your agency away. If you're going to quick fix, you're not learning from it. Um, there's various drugs you can take to inhibit the alcohol, makes you sick and things like that.
Yeah.
It works for some people. I guess it does. I think it's still prevention rather than cure. You've got to. I think you've got to make sense of it. At some stage, you've got to take your own agency back and go,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's not working. Otherwise, well, you don't have to. I suppose it's choice. But if you want to thrive, if you want to flourish, if you want to make sense of life, I think you've got to have that agency back. And as you said, the phone is a great way to give it back, to lose your agency.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why kind of it's become. I've thought about this a lot, and kind of my mission, I guess the way I state it is to kind of elevate human consciousness, right? What role can I play in that? And I think, regardless of your religious beliefs or your, not getting into that territory at all, just there's part of us that is very animalistic, right? There's part of us that, we have those primal drives, but there's also the part of us, like the part of Ryan right now that is talking to Hamish. This is not a primal drive. We call it consciousness or whatever. And I think that the solution here is like we said, kind of create this gap between our connection to our attachment to our physiology and our experience of the world, and kind of like our consciousness. And I think, in my view, that's what a lot of the religious texts are really telling us to do in the world. Now, I said I wouldn't tread onto religious beliefs, and I just did there. So that's my belief. But I think that no matter how you cut it, I think that's really what we need to be thinking about is how are we, how is the uniqueness, whatever this consciousness is, whether it's, there's theories out there that the way our brains are set up run at a certain hertz, in frequency, which causes us to be conscious of ourselves. And what does that actually mean? But I think we all understand the specialness of it. And I think to be able to elevate that, to be able to be, not subject to our nervous system as much, and have the right balance of, disattachment or detachment and, and connection. I think that's really the equation that humanity is trying to solve. And so I just, the headline I put on that is, how do we elevate consciousness? Maybe it's how do we appropriately position it in the horizon is a better way to say it, but it doesn't feel as right. But I think that's something that we're beginning to, I think it's, as a species, we're beginning to kind of, what does this mean? And there are people out there, regardless of what you think of them, they're thinking about, oh, well, consciousness needs to go into computers, or consciousness, we need to think about going to other planets or whatever. And these are all very external manifestations of this, but I think it's a very personal, like kind of internal issue that we've got to deal with. How do we balance our consciousness with what's happening with our body, and that's not just our body, our experience of that and our beliefs about what's going to happen here. There's just there's a lot there to ponder.
There is, isn't there? And yeah, Eastern philosophy has been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. You look at the yin and the yang, that balance. You said balance several times in that conversation there, and it is. Yeah, I mean, what is consciousness? We can go down a rabbit hole or wormhole there, isn't it? But it is, because this is my body, the cells change. So if this is me and all the cells have changed, when was I Hamish, or when will I be? It's a bit cuckoo. I'm more than my experiences. I'm not my emotions and feeling. Thank God for that. Certainly during addiction, I'm very glad that those were not true. They felt it. That's another story. So that detachment that you mentioned, explain that to me, because I've met this recently and I'm wrapping my head around it, and I just got a treat. I don't quite follow how much detachment, because in addiction I was too disattached.
Yeah, I think so. It's something that I think really needs to be discovered, because when I started meditating, I think I followed Sam Harris, which he has an app called Waking Up, and I've probably been part of that app for like 5 years, and it's really powerful. And I think when you look at all of the different apps that are out there, I think I use a couple of them, but Waking Up's kind of my central one. And the thing that kind of, again, it's really hard to describe an experience, right? We're kind of describing the dust and the, and the swirling and the light kind of type thing. But I think that's at least a headline that kind of points people in the right direction. And I think what it really is it really is kind of understanding what we mean when we say our self. And so Sam Harris used to have this this is going to be very difficult to explain. So this might just be, not even worth it, but we'll give it a shot. He used to, so doing this meditation, and then Sam Harris would say, he kind of guides you through it. So I'm sitting there, meditating, but, you're having these intrusive thoughts and all that stuff is happening. And you're just kind of, it's this process of, oh, I've got to pay my bills. Okay. Step back. That's okay. And let that go. Okay. Oh, now my shoulder hurts. Okay. Step back and let that go. And that's kind of creating the space. But then he says, just for a second now, look for who's looking. And I'm like, what? Look for who's looking? I mean, first of all, I was like, my eyes are closed. Second of all, who's, like externally? But then, and so I would have these moments of frustration. And then I, would be like, okay, let's step back from the frustration. Let's not get wrapped up in the thought of frustration. And I think this is the process of creating that space. And you're doing it like a micro millimeter at a time, right? And then it contracts, and you're like, okay, now I'm comfortable doing this. And I think that it's just so. I think one of the things that Viktor Frankl said. Viktor Frankl is, famously this psychologist who basically, he watched most of his family be killed during the Holocaust. And, he said that, there's a space between stimulus and response. That in that space is where you find your freedom. And that kind of, I think people had glimpsed that. So it was enough to kind of hop on the zeitgeist for the times, if you will. But I think now there's really a lot there, and you're just creating that space. And I think we talked about agency, we talked about choice. And I think what happened is that in addiction, I don't know, I'm making an assertion now, so you tell me your experience with it. But I think sometimes when we do the very aggressive regulations like alcohol is, we're giving away the ability to choose whether we're going to be connected or not. So you're just saying, okay, yeah, just cut it. I can't deal with it anymore. Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to create some space here, because that takes work, that takes effort. But if you do, you smoke a cigarette, you do a line of coke, you have a drink, a shot or whatever, you're saying with your action, okay, I'm just going to cut off that connection. And so I think really it is kind of an exercise of how attached am I going to be to what's happening here. And that's where it's up to the individual, because, you certainly can do things like even, my brother describes this experience. My brother who's, he describes his experience of, having morphine. He had, he was experiencing severe pain, and they gave him morphine, and he was like, he's like, for me, it was like speed. I was like, okay, let's go. And he started getting up and pulling the IV, and they're like, no, you can't, you're like in tremendous pain, like, but it disconnected him from his body. Right. And so there's a danger when you do that too, because, I've heard a story about people who had like a broken leg, and then they get up once they get morphine, and their leg is then becoming a compound fracture because they can't feel it. Right. So there is, it speaks to the utility of pain, so to speak. So that's the danger in those quick kind of fixes, right? Because you don't understand what you're actually, you don't understand that you're just disconnecting. And I think a lot of things are like that. So there's, in our lives, the stories that we tell ourselves play a part in that. Interesting, when I remember there was a show that was really big here in the US called Mad Men. And I had this experience where it's about this executive who's in the 1950s and 60s, and he's your quintessential like womanizer. He's married and has kids, but has all these other women on the side, and he's speaks down to everybody at work and just dominates everything. And it was this big powerful man. And there's one episode where I remember I was watching it. I knew there was some kind of emotional resonance happening. But he talks about how he's like, it was like an outro of an episode, and he says, I feel like I can see my life. It's right there. And I'm scratching and I'm pulling and I'm trying to get into it. And no matter what I do, I can't get into it. And I remember I just kind of welled over an emotion, but he had set his life up to really cut himself off
Mm.
from his kind of self, right? And so there's all kinds of different barriers that we can put in front of ourselves. And those quick fixes, if they're not done intentionally, if they're done through drugs or kind of building up this story about power and prestige, they cut us off from something. And I think really, the question that we're asking is, what? Yeah, it is difficult, but it's got to be kind of your own journey. And I really think um, that's part of what I'm exploring now personally, and what I'm interested in. Uh, as far as interacting with other people.
You have given me an unbelievable amount of clarity and helped me join so many dots there.
Oh
Um,
wow, okay,
because it is choice. It's that, as you said, it's that tiny little space that I just filled with booze. So
yeah,
there was always one option. It was always react, drink, numb, hide, shame, whatever.
mm-hmm.
But when I took the drink away, I had that little horrible space where it was all this fear and stuff which I didn't understand, but none of it killed me. None of it was what this thing was saying, it will kill you, it'll destroy you, la la la.
Yeah,
And so I
yeah,
could then choose the drink or choose to go, that is really frightening, but it didn't kill me. It didn't
mm-hmm.
hurt me. It allowed me to be authentic. And triggers exactly the same. Trigger, thump, hate you, violence, whatever. Trigger,
Yeah,
I want that reaction. I want that outcome. I want to be nice. I don't want to hurt my friend when they say something to upset me. I've got that choice. So
yeah,
what you've said, by stepping back, you're allowing yourself to see that choice before you fly off the handle.
yeah.
And that's it. And you've really cleared something up for me there that makes so much sense. Yeah, be the observer,
Oh,
isn't it?
cool.
Yeah, be
Yeah,
the observer. Yeah.
yeah, it really is. And I've been working. One of the things I notice, as I do work as a coach, is that people will have certain. We rely on things. So I think there's something else that you kind of revealed there, which I'm kind of pointing to. That we rely on things to give us energy or give us motivation, and sometimes it's fear. We're like,
Mhm.
oh, I want to, I need to have a place to live, so I'm going to get a job that pays X amount so I can live. Sometimes that can show up as a fearful thing, whereas you're like, whoa, all these things I don't want to deal with over here. Um, you know, there's that's giving you energy to run towards, kind of this quick solution. And so I think one of the things that this suggests is like, what would it be like to use something like positive for the fuel, right? Instead of it's like anxiety or stress or, it's weird to be like, if I'm going to live from like a joy at the center, things show up very differently, right? So you've got, if you're worried about paying your bills, you're going to be like, I need more money. There's never enough money. You're always focused on it. But if you're living from joy, then it's like, I don't have enough money to pay this bill today or this month. But man, my kids are my kids are awesome, and I didn't think I'd live this long. And wow, there's the dust twirling and that's like a place of joy. So it's like what a lot of people, they step into that for a moment, and it's so disorienting because they're like, oh, how do I only know how to work from anxiety or fear or whatever, because those are very powerful energy givers, if you will, and so we talked about agency, we talked about choice, and to me, it's all about intentionality. Then at that point in time, you have to kind of uh, you have to be really intentional about doing everything. Otherwise, you just end up looking like you're stoned, like swaying in the breeze, because life is good, I'm coming from joy, but you've got to be able to intentionally take the action there. So um, I hope I did a good job of seeing it, pointing out how that connects here.
Mm.
But really, I think that there is, when we think about our nervous system or fight or flight, there is some things that come from that do a lot of good for us in life. They propel us to great heights. And I think where the balance comes in is choosing when you want to. That's kind of what I work with as far as in coaching, is that people are like, okay, that's not serving me anymore. I need a new fuel source. But so if it's joy, if it's, what is that? And then how do I navigate that? Because life is completely different when you switch fuel sources, right? And the tendency is to go back to fear or go back to stress, and that's why a lot of us find ourselves in this like cycle of like, oh, life is good, oh, life is bad, life is, and so, and myself included.
Mm. Yep, I love that, and I think one of the reasons to validate why people fall back is because that's familiar. I'm familiar
Mm,
with being hit by my husband because my father hit me when I was a child. I'm familiar with being downtrodden because my dad was assertive. I'm familiar with
yeah,
being walked over because of this. And that familiarity is really, you're safe. You might be
yeah,
unsafe with the external bit, but you understand it. You know how to deal within that space. So
yeah,
it's not unreasonable to go back there because you're, as I said, you're safe, but you've got no agency. You're not able to grow and nourish yourself and find better sources because that safety, that anxiety. So
yeah.
how do you encourage people to step out of that space? Because that's when the magic is, when you take that step into that uncertainty.
I think that there's just, you have to keep pointing back to, because it's funny when I hear people, when I'm coaching people. I mean, really, it's kind of structured in the way I coach people is I don't bring anything of my own into it. I just kind of ask questions about curiosity,
Mm.
and it's really powerful when they hear themselves say it. So I'll hear them saying over and over again, "Yeah, no, 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 no. I'm good with anxiety and fear. That's what I want to do." And it's like, okay, but we're talking about how you don't like anxiety and fear, and they're like, yeah, you're right. And I mean, that's kind of what it is that they have to experience that from every different angle. So maybe in this domain, maybe this domain, maybe at this time of day. And you start realizing, oh, and you really start kind of realizing that it is some work. And it's the reason why everybody isn't walking around joyful and really impacting the world in the way they want to, is because it is work. You constantly have to
Mm.
be like, it's so much easier. If you take procrastination, for example, they know this. People procrastinate because when it's like, oh shit, I got to get this done, there's energy there. Whereas it's like, I'm going to do a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow. It's kind of like, whatever. But the same thing with the way we live our lives. It's like, okay, I'm going to see my boss as the enemy who's constantly putting pressure on me and not an ally. And then that's what motivates them.
Mm.
Whereas if they're like, it's hard to kind of, then you're responsible and you're intentional for everything, which is kind of, a lot of us have a hard time facing that. It's like a lot of, responsibility can seem overwhelming. So really it's just a constant revisiting of, okay, so we're kind of going back to this idea of fear and, uh, anxiety, kind of being the energy that fuels our life. Okay. Um, that's not what you want to do anymore. You wanted to kind of have, you know, passion or impact at that center, and so, what's that look like? And then they're forced to answer the question, so they have to think about it. And they're like, wow, and they just start putting together the pieces of how they have to change because it feels different. And like you said, it's so comfortable if you're used to anxiety or you're used to fear. That's an instant energy source, right?
Mm.
You're just like, okay, here it is, because we're efficient. We want to be efficient, and so we'll do those things that get the result. Whereas what you and I have talked about and perhaps discovered is that being like, whoa, slow down, and what is my intention here? And that's really putting that space between stimulus and response, and starting to discover what our balance is between our attachment to our body and the world, and yeah, all those things. It's about like intentionality. And so I think just revisiting that, oh yeah, I'm using the turbo energy, instead of the energy that I want to use, which is a slower burn but a more consistent, longer burn.
Fabulous. I think you have given me an awful lot to think about. You've given my listeners an awful lot to think about. So thank you. Yeah, I think that was really, really interesting. It is. It's agency, taking responsibility for yourself, that horrible word responsibility, and the even worse one, accountability.
Yeah.
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 Ryan, thank you. Where can people find out how to get a slow fix from you? Because I'm pretty sure you don't give them quick fixes.
Yeah. Well, of course, there is my website, which is ryanwattslifecoaching.com. And there's if you're signing up for the email list there, you can get something I think is a great kind of window into the things that we've talked about. And there's lots of different tools, lots of different ways to access what we've talked about. But I think emotional IQ is a good one. That's Daniel Goleman. So there's kind of 5 dimensions of that, and there always seems to be one that really rings true with somebody. For instance, for me, it was self-regulation, and how am I regulating my highs and lows? What am I doing to do that? And how is that kind of impacting my success as I see it in my life? So you can get that at ryanwattslifecoaching.com. I also have a podcast, which is the Personal Success Podcast. So you can find that on any platform out there. And I'd love to hear from anybody regarding any questions that we talked about. We kind of scratched the surface on a lot of things.
We did. And he's also on LinkedIn. I can vouch for that because that's where we met each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And the link to that is on my website. I'm not sure what the URL is off the top of my head.
No, Ryan, thank you. And thank you for all that information that you have on your website for people to tap into a bit more detail what we talked about. This really has been a fabulous conversation.
Well, thank you. I for a minute there, I forgot that we were recording a podcast and just was talking with you. So I think that's a sign of the quality of conversation that we're having. So thank you.
No, that's really good. Thank you. And last question, what is your superpower that you got from making sense of your changes and your awakening?
That's a great question. That's a fantastic question. I think really what the answer to that question is that I've explained this to myself in finding my what's the word? This not the center point. This has to do with the Big Bang. What is the single point in the? I swear I use this terminology. The singularity. Yes, finding the singularity. And I think what I have, the way I've experienced it is every day I have mission statements and all these value statements and things like that. But I take time in the practice every day, my morning routine, meditation, yoga, whatever it takes. Sometimes it's just sitting there for a moment and I get back to that singularity, and kind of leave the space open to just see where I'm being called, where I'm being pulled. And I think that is really, that's a superpower for me because it keeps me kind of connected and plugged into that energy, that creative energy of the universe, if you will. It really is about opening up space to allow it to come in. And I call that the singularity because it then creates the big bang of how you show up in the world.
I absolutely love that. Yeah. Look into the singularity and make that big bang. Brilliant. Ryan, thank you ever so much for today. I have enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'm glad you got up early this morning for this. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. So I hope we get to talk again.
We definitely will. We've just touched on an awful lot of things. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hamish.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Crucible, Conversations for the Curious. If these powerful stories of transformation resonated with you, be sure to like, subscribe and share this show with anyone who you think could do with a dose of inspiration for their own journey. I would really appreciate it if you could make any comments on your favourite podcast platform as well. That helps me reach more people. All the important links and information are in the show notes below. Thank you very much for listening and catch up with you soon.